bit. So, hi everybody. I'm Lisa Plagemeyer. I'm the Executive Director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and I'm here today with Oz. Oz, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Oz Alashe. I'm CEO and founder at StaySafe. We're a human risk management platform. Looking forward to spending some time with you today.
Yeah, so Oz has been a frequent speaker and sponsor. We really appreciate that at Convene. And CyberSafe put out a blog a little bit ago, and I said, you know what, Oz, this would be a really good topic for our Convene chat. And so he's got a few slides, but we also want this to be conversational. So if you guys have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or in the Q&A is probably easier for me to manage if you want to drop them in there, any comments or questions. Um, Oz, what are we talking about today? Let's go.
Yeah, so we are talking about security outcomes, and there's a few reasons why we're talking about it, and certainly a few reasons why that blog that you mentioned, Lisa, was written in the first place. Actually, it actually came on the back of a nearly 2 years worth of conversations, and that was a really rather fantastic way for us to kind of understand what was happening out in the community, what was happening out in the field, what was happening in security teams up and down a bunch of different countries, where those people responsible for the human aspect and managing the human risk, the security awareness programs, security awareness behavior culture programs, various programs titled various different things, and in some cases quite different from each other, but ultimately all on this kind of journey, and the journey was kind of moving towards a focus on outcomes. And so that was it, Lisa. That was kind of how this came about. That's what we're going to talk about now today. And if everyone's okay, I think we get straight into it, and I can kind of maybe explain a little bit more. For those who haven't quite worked out and just listening to this bloke and thinking, why does he sound funny? It's because clearly I'm on the other side of the pond, probably to most of you. I suspect not all. I know there is an international community here. I split my time between the UK and the US, primarily London and Boston, and I happen to be back over in sunny London right now, back over at stateside in a couple of weeks. So yeah, ready to get going when you are, Lisa.
Yeah, so I thought this was a great topic because outcomes is, first of all, I don't think there's clarity on what an outcome is. Like we're always looking for more metrics. Of course, we do training completion and all the metrics around phishing, reporting, and clicks and all those things. But everybody is on. I think there's been a real push over the last couple of years to try and get more quantitative and figure out what it is. What else? Because human beings are squishy and culture is squishy, and how do we actually measure these things? So I really like this topic.
Yeah, well, again, I do too. And I think that kind of being less squishy is important whilst still maintaining our humanity, if that makes any sense. So it's really rather important, clearly, for us that we're able to not just have genuine impact and genuine effect, but of course, bring and highlight and center the humanity within the technology systems that exist in our organizations. And so there's a tightrope there to be walked, there's a balance to be struck, but actually outcomes helps us, is the truth. Outcomes helps
Yeah,
us really be sure that what we're doing is effective.
I think
So
that's what the business wants, right?
that's exactly what the business wants. This is what's
Yeah.
expected across anywhere else. And if we're serious about being taken seriously, so if we're going to be credible, as somebody, CISO once described me to me, they said, "This is important, but I'm not really sure my peers value it." And that's absolutely right. Quite often, it's considered important. You will not meet a security leader anywhere that does not think the human aspect is important. You just won't meet one. But actually, then get them to demonstrate or ask them whether they truly value it in the same way that they value other aspects. And when they're being brutally honest, they'll explain why. And actually, here's the truth. Sometimes they're right. We haven't earned the right. There's a chap called Ira Winkler. Many of you will know who he is. And he has a phrase, which is you get the budget that you deserve. You get the budget that you deserve. I would say you get the budget, you get the attention, you get the focus, you get the resourcing, you get the team that you deserve. Now, of course, there are extenuating circumstances, but largely that's true. And this is about helping ourselves collectively share what we're seeing. And that's what this session is, by the way. This is not what Oz thinks. This is not what CyberSafe thinks or does, because even though we're actually really proud of what we do actually doesn't matter as much as what we all share collectively. So this is just a sharing, and I'm hopefully going to just help us have a conversation that many of you are maybe having in other places too. All right, now let me see if I can share a screen that works rather well, and then we'll get straight into it. And as you've heard, like the slides are really there just to help us as we go, rather than for us to follow. slavishly. So hopefully you can see the screen. Hopefully you can still see me, and much more importantly, hopefully you can still see Lisa. She's much better um, to look at than I am. But
My
we're going to.
Orjak style shirt today because I figured we're going to talk about a little bit of psychology. So I'll
We will touch on psychology. We will look at psychology. Maybe first bit, just to kind of tee up the conversation, a couple of things that shouldn't be news to anybody, but it would be a shame for people to kind of miss out. The conversation around the cost to the business of not addressing the human aspect is evolving. It's evolving. And actually, we're seeing some really great examples of organizations talk about the cost to the business in much more effective ways. Ultimately, being able to talk in dollars and cents is probably the most impactful way you'll be able to do anything. And of course, there's about more than just risk, as we all know. So we're not going to dive into this today, but if anybody would like more about this and how other organizations are doing this and how organizations are linking it to dollars and cents, happy to do that anytime. This is maybe where I would suggest we dwell on for the first bit,
yep.
because this is maybe the area, Lisa, that in my experience and in the conversations that I had and have had specifically over the last 2 years, it's becoming really obvious that there's still a bit of confusion amongst the security awareness, behavior, culture. I'm going to call it the ABC community from now on, the ABC community about the difference between inputs, outputs, and
Still get
outcomes.
confused. So yeah, let's talk about
Yeah,
these.
well, so and understandably so, and there's no shame in this, by the way. Everybody kind of is confused until they're not confused. So the reality is that, and actually there might be some people listening thinking, "Gosh, I didn't see it like that," or "I thought it was something different." So inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Inputs are the thing that you do, the thing that we put in, unsurprisingly, hence the word. In the context of our day-to-day work, for many of you, it might be the initiative that you have run and set up. So the input might be the training session or the training content or the escape room or the webinar. Those things are inputs. And if you were to kind of measure them and count them, which many of us do, how many webinars did we run? How long did that webinar run? How many people attended that thing? How many people saw our intranet page? How many people opened our newsletter? Those would be outputs. Those would be outputs. And this is really important because in the context of how many outputs we have and inputs, outputs are important. Indeed, they are a metric that is worth considering, recording, and sometimes reporting on. But they're not outcomes. They're not the reason that you did it. You didn't do the webinar just so that people attended the webinar. You didn't do write the email or the training content just so that people consumed that piece of training content. Presumably, you were trying to achieve something, change something, do something. And so that would be your outcome. And then again, if I stuck with the kind of training content, or maybe it's just stuck with our ABC space, then of course, what changed? Did anybody learn anything that did anybody change any behaviors? How confident did confidence levels change? Did anything else in the organization change? The reality is the outcomes could be varied. When it comes to security outcomes, they really are varied, and we're going to talk through some of them. But that kind of difference is really important. If you really want to simplify it, I like to think of it as going to the gym. The input, going to the gym. The output, how many reps did you actually do? The outcome, how much stronger did you get? Really very
Great
important.
analogy.
Quite useful.
Anybody can wrap their head around that one. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. There are a couple of paradigm shifts that people should be aware of. They are very exciting. They drive quite a lot of what we're doing right now. There is access to data that if we were having this conversation even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, it would have just been much harder to do across your organizations. Data across your security tech stack, data across your productivity tech stack, data across other bits of technology in organization, all of which help you with this attempt to quantify, measure, and report on outcomes. And this is really important. Everything from security behaviors all the way through to how much time you're saving the organization. And this is an important feature because when this data was harder to get access to, it was harder to do what we're talking about. But it's not so hard to get access to it now. We can again help you with that if that's at all helpful in conversation and help you understand how other people are persuading their organizations to give them access. You don't need any particular technology. You don't have to use CyberSafe. You can do some of this stuff literally with what you have. There are, of course, tools that make it easier and faster. The science is evolving. We are not the only professionals in our organizations, or more importantly, on the planet, trying to change behavior. Yet, quite often in security, we have looked quite inward and made a bunch of assumptions. But actually, there's an evidence base that we can tap into, and the evidence base is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And more importantly, the link between the academic community and the practitioner community is getting stronger and stronger. Really exciting. Lisa, that is something I would definitely highlight. And then, of course, finally, the technology. As I said, you can do lots of this stuff yourself, but the reality is, of course, you can also rely on tools to help you. And of course, we could, and we're going to try and get through this talk without talking too much about artificial intelligence today, but that's another great example of another technological advancement that is fundamentally changing the dynamic, and it's really rather exciting. One for another Convene chat, I suspect. So that's the kind of backdrop to the conversation. There was a period of about 26 months where I spoke to literally hundreds of security practitioners and security and risk leaders, but in particular, maybe about 46, 50 odd organizations where in those conversations, you just thought, wow, I've not seen anybody kind of measuring that before, or that's a fantastic thing to measure. That would be worth adding to a list. And I just started writing them down. And I got to about 16, 17, and I thought, this is going to be really useful. I suspect other people would look at this and say, if that's a way in which you might be able to express value, maybe that'll work in my organization. I promise you this, when you see the full list of 31 examples, you will say that, half of them are not from me, but you will see a bunch of things that are for you. And they're all in a blog and in a newsletter, freely accessible. We just literally just collated them all and put them out there. And of course, that was what sparked you saying, let's jump on a call and
Yeah,
talk.
and
We're
I
going to talk about 11, but
what
we're
would
not
you
talking
think
about.
if people are looking at that list and they've got something to add? Should we
Yeah,
ask them to
please, if you
put that in
have
the
anything
chat?
to add, put it in the chat, put it in, fire it into the Convene team. Please send it to us here at StaySafe. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't done so already. I would love to hear it and add it to the list. We believe, and I know that this is right at the heart of the Convene community as well, we believe that our community is stronger by sharing aggressively. Sharing aggressively. Literally, if we see something good, or we see something that we're not sure about, or we see something that we think is potentially helpful, just put it out there and let other people make what they will of it.
For another way to access this aside from the QR code. Cliff, can you pull the link and drop
Cool.
it in there? Yes, thank you.
100%.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Shall we go?
Yep.
So 11 things. We're not going to dwell on all of them. In fact, some of them are arguably ones that many of you may have heard of before. But like I said, it just gives you a snapshot, and it's 11 of 31. Key point, I said on this slide earlier on, actually, there are 4 categories. And I know that somebody's probably thinking, what do you mean by categories? In most organizations, there are generally 4 things that the organization is trying to do, and 4 things that get prioritized, or at least if you can link to those 4 things, you get one of those 4 things, or indeed as many of them as you can, you will be prioritized. The first one is make money. Make money. Not quite the case for every single organization. Clearly, charities might not be the case, but in most cases, they're there to generate revenue. And if the organization is interested in doing that, then if you can help the organization do that, you will be prioritized, especially if it's clear how that's the case. The second one, save money, reduce costs. The third one, reduce my risk. This is the one that in security we focus on the most, but it's not actually the only thing we do. And as we talk about outcomes, we'll see how we can do some of the others too. And then the fourth one, make us more productive. Make us more productive. So 4 things: make me money,
I'm
save
going
me
to
money, reduce my risk, make me more
chime
productive.
in on a couple of those Oz just from my experience. So you might be thinking like, how can the security team actually make money? So one of the things that I did when I was a practitioner, my CISO and I partnered with the sales team, and we got out ahead of the third party risk process. So we went and the whole contracting process. So we went to some of our larger customers where we were just looking for more share of wallet, like we wanted to get more business with them. And we had meetings with their security team. We just asked if we could sit down with them and share about our program. And uh, it was great. Like we were able to just kind of go through the highlights of our program. We were really honest about what our challenges were and what we're working on. And because every security team, nobody's perfect. Every security team has challenges. They're all working on things, and the key is that they're working on the right things and that they're constantly trying to improve and reduce risk. And so to be able to have that open conversation with a potential customer or a current customer where you're trying to get more business, it really paved the way. They were very transparent, more transparent than they would have been in like your typical, 60 question spreadsheet questionnaire third party risk process, which really at the time was pretty broken. I think some of those processes are getting better, but um, you can absolutely be an asset to the sales team, and you don't have to be in financial services for security to be a part of your brand, to be part of like what you do and what's important to your customers, especially these days.
That's
The
right.
other thing you might be asking is how in the heck can security reduce cost? Well, the other thing that we were able to do when we were trying to identify data that needed to be protected, or we would constantly, in some of the projects that were going on the security team with the business, we would stumble across things where we could reduce, at the time, servers that could be decommissioned, or these days, probably, you could probably bring the cloud bill down a little bit, the monthly bill for cloud services. When you start to realize that whenever you do especially a project like that, where you're trying to figure out what data needs to be protected and where it is and what you have, those data identification projects, you're gonna find things that people spun up and just left there because somebody was testing something, somebody wanted to see, wanted to, maybe somebody in product was trying was trying to do something, somebody was testing something and then walked away from it and it hasn't been decommissioned. And so, believe it or not, things like that on the security team when you're doing those kinds of projects, so I would say, like, make sure you stay in touch with different folks on the team. I always felt like it was my role to understand what the whole security team was working on so that I could best help them tell the story to the business about how we help them make money or save money. So don't I would encourage you, even though we're clearly today talking about human programs, but I would encourage you to think of yourself more, or in addition, as the communications arm of the security team, and being able to. It's another value that you bring, being able to communicate well about things like this. And so, if you're in the know about good things that the security team has done for the business as far as making money or saving money, maybe you can help the rest of the team talk about those things, or make sure the whole company is aware of the value that the security team brings. That's my 2 cents, Oz. I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. No, I think that's so powerful and so good, and especially the thinking on behalf of and communicating and sharing and telling the story on behalf of the whole security team. And some examples, we'll touch on a couple in a minute. But actually, like I said, please do go and have a look at the page where the full list of 31 is on there, because you'll see examples of things very specific to security awareness, behavior, and culture programs, very specific about how we can demonstrate. There was one organization who basically went away and said, right, I'm going to pull all of the deals in the pipeline, all of the deals in the pipeline. I'm going to have a look at all of those that are RFP, all of those that are RFP. I'm going to see all of those that have a security requirement, and all of those that have a security requirement. I'm going to see whether they mention a framework. And then every single framework that basically mentions that they need a security awareness, behavior, security focus, I'm going to be able to explain to the business how we are enabling us to build pipeline like this, because if we don't have it, we can't go for these types of opportunities. So organizations are finding ways to have the conversation, but you'll find the one that works for you. Okay, so
Question for you about security incidents tied to human error. So
yeah,
my
so
experience was usually that there's more than one thing that goes wrong to cause an incident. Like somebody clicks on a fish, human error, but maybe there was a misconfigured security tool or something, another human error, maybe by somebody on the IT team. But it's usually, or it could be in the world of technology products, it could be a vulnerability that is accompanied by somebody clicking on the wrong thing. So how do you measure things like that? Well, because there's never, my experience is there's usually multiple failures that lead to a big incident. It's usually not one thing.
yeah, that's absolutely right. Rarely is it ever one thing. And of course, even if it was ever one thing, the chance that you might get it right immediately first off is often quite challenging and unlikely. But what I really like about this one, in many ways, maybe more than any of the others, as it relates to risk reduction, but ultimately, even amongst the others, what I really like about this one is it kind of focuses us on what we're here for and ultimately what we're doing. If you think about it, there's risk to the organization, and that risk manifests itself in a certain way. So this forces you, in order to even consider doing this forces us to say, do we even know when there are incidents? In most cases, most of the people doing the types of jobs that you're doing do. And then do we track whether and how the human aspect might have related to that? And as Lisa just said, there could be multiple ways. Now, when I talk about the human aspect, in most cases on this kind of environment, I'm simply talking about the general workforce population. I'm talking about the users of technology rather than the masters, maintainers, and makers of technology. Yep. So I'm not talking about those really bright men and women in your organizations who are coding, who are setting up infrastructure. They are of course humans. They of course make mistakes, but by far the majority of your organization are probably other people who still use technology to do their day-to-day work. So understanding the links between their actions and incidents is important. If you measure incidents and you record which ones have had a human element to it, and ultimately, if you're responsible in an ABC type of role, I can't think of why you wouldn't be trying to do that. Then, of course, now when you deliver your interventions, and those interventions could be varied, training, escape rooms, content, webinars. I mean, I'm not going to go through it all here. You all understand the kinds of things you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Presumably, it's to impact something, maybe behaviors, and presumably that's because you believe that those are tied to either these incidents or potential incidents. If they are real incidents that you're recording, and you're impacting the behaviors, then there's a chance that you'll see them reduce. Of course, there's a chance that you won't. You may have influenced the behavior and the incidents might still be going, but at least you know that you now need to start looking somewhere else. So this focuses us in the right place, and those are examples of how we see people recording it. And we know lots of people recording incidents, but not necessarily recording the link between the human activity. Human error here, I am aware that there are slips, lapses, and mistakes, and not everything is an error, but I'm using the umbrella term for ease. All right, we're going to keep going at a canter. Sorry, I should have probably said that. I'm a former army officer. If my wife was here, and those who know me would know that I speak too fast, and as she would say, wear my trousers too high. So I'm going to try and not speak quite as fast, but it will give us a chance of getting through at least a few of these before we get kicked off stage by Cliff. Lisa, this is another one. Stronger security culture. We talk about security culture quite a lot. And actually, in many ways, this is maybe one of the ones that is most progressed for many organizations, providing they have been clear about what they mean by security culture. And this varies. And I don't believe it's for anyone to tell you what culture means. But I would suggest that if you're not sure, don't know where to start, then you can do worse than think about values, attitudes, and beliefs. What are the values, the attitudes, and the beliefs, or the values, attitudes, and beliefs and perceptions of your people? But the reality is many organizations throw more things. The values, attitudes, and beliefs that drive the way people behave in your organization. And of course, when it comes to security culture, that's the values, attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions relating to security. So those things shifting, values, attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions, that is an outcome. That's a fantastic outcome if the shift is positive. But of course, you won't know if you don't measure it. So this is one that we see organizations increasingly trying to do.
Somebody has asked a question here. What specific stat shows that human error or employees not reading, paying attention, or trained on cyber versus incidents due to technology glitches do you have? Is it 80% human failure, 20%, we'll call it technology failure? I mean, most of the things I read put the percentage in the human failure percentage in the 90s, in the high 90s. Um, and I think, but like I said, I think there's always behind that human failure is probably also a technology failure because we haven't really achieved secure by design yet, right? So, um,
Mm.
Oz, what do you think? What do
I
you think
think
the
it's I think
percentage
this one
is?
is challenging, and I would fixate less on the actual absolute number and more on the kind of the order of magnitude, because as Lisa said, there's lots and lots of reports that would suggest in the 90s, in the 80s. Interestingly, if I had to pick one, or at least one study that was maybe the one that I would focus on the most, I actually like the Verizon DBIR,
Yeah,
because not only are they consistent and they've been doing it for some time, but they really well explain the methodology. And those of you who would have seen the DBIR this year would have seen that the number that they actually presented was 68%, 68% tied to human error. But what I liked about it, and some of you will be alarmed and say, wait a minute, in the past they had said it was 80 something, 88. They actually explained why. It has always been 68% of what the general user population has done, and then a percentage, the on top, about other human beings in the organizations configuring things. And they've broken that out separately. So if you're talking about every single thing a human being might do, you're in the 80s and maybe 90s. But the reality is, I think for us, we're trying to help our workforces be more secure and engage in secure behaviors. And so the 68% makes much more sense, because actually, ultimately, when it comes to security, what isn't human related? Tell me what's happening in that
right,
system hasn't got a person behind it somewhere. So that's why.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good question, though.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. So we've talked about a couple of things. We're now on past culture, and we're going to talk about compliance with policies.
I'm
Now,
gonna
this is
hold you
really
one more second though on culture, Oz, because we had another question
oh, yeah.
about metrics to measure culture. So in the blog, you talk about one of the metrics being increased incident reporting because employees are more engaged and more aware, and so they're more likely to report things. So actually, your reporting goes up. What else is there to measure culture? We actually have one organization, maybe there's two that I know of now, that took the report that we produce with SciSafe every year, the O Behavior report, the behavioral science report, and we shared the survey questions and they ran that same survey in their organization so that then they could compare. And some of those questions definitely get at culture. Um,
Yeah.
any other metrics to measure culture besides
So this is, I think
reporting?
this is a really important one, but of course, remember, it depends on how you define culture. So that organization who's measuring incidents, or sorry, yeah, in the particular case, reporting incidents or people reporting, that's the security behavior, and ultimately, culture is what people do, but why they do it. If that makes any sense, the values, attitudes, the perceptions, the beliefs that shape and drive the way people behave. So at CyberSafe, we separate actually measuring culture and behavior just to make the measurement easier. But depending on your organization, if you lump behavior in there as well, then there's so many different behaviors, and we can talk about that in a second. There are other things though. I talked about, of course, attitudes and perceptions. It is possible to measure, especially if you do so well. Please be careful with surveys. Please be careful with surveys. There are so many of us, myself included, that thought you could just ask people a bunch of questions, get some data, and then you've got the answers to things. And we don't realize that we skew the data if we don't ask the question properly. And there will be people in your organization, or you could get this access to this information very easily in order to better structure those questions. But if you ask good questions, you will get great data. And attitudes and perceptions are fantastic indicators of culture. Fantastic. We often get asked by people, can I see who's provided that answer? Because they can see their own data, obviously, in the CyberSafe platform. And we say, no, this is the one thing that's kept anonymous because you don't want people to skew the data. It skews the data slightly, actually, not by as much as you think, but it does skew it if people think that there's not a complete safety there. Whereas when you get the complete truth from people, they tell you, well, the reason I don't know what to do about this thing is because you tell me to do this over here, and actually the policy says something slightly different over there, so I haven't done anything at all. I'm just waiting, and that's really important. So the attitude and behaviors and the O
One of
behavior
the
is
one of
good.
the behaviors that we measured to get at culture when I was a practitioner was demand for services. How much is the business coming to us and asking questions, asking for security reviews, asking for process reviews, asking for us to be involved in like product planning or service process conversations. So we had a ticketing system, so we just looked for an increase in those types of tickets.
So cool.
Somebody asked, what internal team did you say to work with to create good surveys? Uh,
Well, depends on your organization. And again, of course, every organization is different. But if you have a research team, any researcher, this is literally at the heart of what they do, how to write research questions and how to answer them well. So if you're fortunate enough to have a research team, then go to them. You might find that actually organizations, for example, if you've got a marketing team, if you've got a revenue operations team, they will, if they've had the time and if they've been invested in, they may have been taught how to ask better questions because they're trying to get the information from the market. They're trying to understand those things. So, but please
you're
do
a
not be, don't despair
large
if you
consumer
don't have.
facing organization, you might have a really if you're Lever Brothers or Procter and Gamble, you've got a great marketing team that really knows how to ask questions and do research. Yeah.
Yeah, don't despair if you don't. The information is all very, very accessible online. And again, please just reach out and we'll help you explain how other people are doing it in security by themselves, but what resources they're using. We can send you the information to that. Right, compliance with policies. I'm going to gloss over this one if you don't mind. We're at number 3. I suspect many of you realize that. And if you're looking at the clock, you're thinking they're at 3 and they're trying to get to 11. No chance. And I reckon there's a lot of people now exchanging money, placing bets, Lisa, to see how far we get. However, um, this policies is one that actually many organizations probably for quite some time have considered as a measure of outcome, as an outcome. And this is an outcome that matters to organizations. I mentioned it here because I think it's an outcome that matters to organizations, but arguably doesn't necessarily tell you what you need to know about risk. And this is important to not confuse the two. Adherence with policy and genuine risk reduction, unfortunately, there's an assumption that's being made there that might be right, but might not be right. So there's more to measure if you are there. But we do see this really commonly, and you'll see it amongst the 31. Behaviors. I've used the example of phishing here because it was one that often came up. But the reality is the key thing that was interesting here was relating it to financial loss. Relating it to financial loss. Some organizations are going as far as to say that when we've had a particular incident and we have lost money, and we therefore do the after action review to understand how that came about, is there anything there that was people related? Now, this wasn't something that I saw a lot of over the course of the conversations I had over that 26-month period, but we did see it quite a few times, and I'm seeing it increasingly so, relating things to financial loss, and that's the key point here. So maybe less focus on the phishing, although phishing of course is a concern for many organizations, but this is interesting. And in the blog paper and in some of the background work, which we're happy to share with whoever would like to see it, we've also got the calculations that people are using as they're trying to describe what they're doing for their calculable loss. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it all, but it was really helpful to see it, and we should share it. Confidence. When we think about our people and we think about how we can help them, we spend quite a lot of time to increase their knowledge and their understanding. But one of the things that we often forget is that confidence does actually play a factor in how people behave, and it plays a factor, therefore, in the risk our organizations carry. If somebody is knowledgeable, or indeed does your test, your quiz, and gets the answer right, but they are not very confident, they may have guessed the answer. Likewise, if somebody does your quiz and they get the answer wrong, but they're very confident, that might be a problem and might be worth knowing about and doing something about. Equally, if somebody gets the answer wrong and isn't very confident, maybe that wasn't actually as bad as you thought. They got the answer wrong, but they weren't confident. If they'd had the opportunity to ask for some help, they would have taken it. They knew they weren't confident. And of course, conversely, somebody could get the answer right and be very confident and everything be great. So confidence is a really important component. And if one of the things that you're trying to improve or change or adjust is ultimately risk, then you might want to consider confidence. That might be an outcome that matters to you. So interesting, noteworthy. We're seeing increasing organizations focus on measuring it. This one is quite topical right now, but actually, in reality, I suspect it's been an issue for a very, very long time and will continue to be an issue because one of the first areas that concerns or challenges and potentially incidents show up are in IT help desk tickets. And so our IT help desk colleagues are often a fantastic source of insight, a fantastic source of data as well, and of course understanding how many security-related IT help desk tickets matter. Now, this ties into a couple of other outcomes that are really exciting and really interesting, I believe, because if there are fewer security-related IT help desk tickets, quite often that's time saved for the IT help desk. Quite often that's disruption not occurring in parts of the business. Quite often that means that those people who are not being disrupted in their workflow, they're not having to reach out to the IT help desk because they're able to get on with what they're doing. And so there are other ways that this can lead to other outcomes that you might want to be able to highlight as beneficial to the business. Employees taking proactive security actions. In security, there are a couple of areas. I did a talk earlier on today, and I used the example of, for those of you who are historians, you'll be aware that during the Second World War, over here in Blighty, during the bombing raids that were taking place on Germany, sorry, any Germans, that was obviously a while ago, we don't do that anymore. During the bombing raids that were taking place in Germany, we were losing a lot of aircraft. And many of the aircraft that were coming back were riddled with bullet holes. And so there was a task force, a team that was put on to look at these aircraft in order to understand what we could do in order to make the aircraft more secure, less vulnerable. And they started looking at where the bullet holes were. And they were going to basically reinforce the areas where lots of bullet holes were, until somebody basically pointed out that, wait a minute, these are the aircraft that made it back. So these are the aircraft that ultimately got back to Blighty, and which meant that ultimately these are the aircraft that maybe weren't the ones that were worst affected. Maybe we need to go back and have a look at it. And it was actually a statistician who pointed this out. And they did, and they worked out that there were other areas to reinforce. This was critical because, of course, not only did we get more aircraft back, not only did that particular unfortunate set of events end sooner, but more importantly, it was a fantastic example of using both sides of the data. In security, we often, especially in the human space, use one side of the data. What are people doing wrong? What are the negative behaviors? People who are going to websites that they shouldn't be, people who are clicking on links they shouldn't be, people who are not reporting that they shouldn't be. Those are negative behaviors. And we miss the other side. Yes, we want to reduce risk, but we also want to increase resilience. So what are the positive behaviors that are being exhibited? Big plug here. If you don't know what behaviors could be exhibited, the security behavior database will help you. and we can share the details for that later on. Open source, fantastic. Many of you have fed into that over the last 6 years, and version 4 is about to come out in the next 6 weeks, and it's going to be amazing. But the key point here is people taking good positive security behaviors, exhibiting good as well as bad, is important, and another indicator of a security outcome being moved. I can't see the questions, so I'm going to allow somebody to interrupt me with them as they
I'm
get
gonna
ready.
let you keep going, and then we're gonna do questions
All
at
right.
the end.
Less downtime from security incidents. This is a fantastic one. Downtime across the organization is key. Remember what I said? Make money, save money, reduce our risk, make us more productive. Downtime talks to productivity. And most organizations, if you can save the organization time, so even if you were reducing the amount of time from downtime, that's not just you saving the organization time, that's actually you giving the organization back hours that can be used to put to good use. And that's a really important thing. And that's an outcome that most businesses seek. Another way you can do it, slightly different, less security training, full stop. I suspect there are a few people in the organization that think it would be a good thing if their organization did more security training. And maybe you're right, but it shouldn't be our default. And more importantly, we should be really clear. What you ultimately want isn't lots of people doing training, it's lots of people behaving well. And training might be a thing that needs to happen as a result in order to deliver that. But if you could actually do it in less time, more effective training, maybe more engaging, and therefore maybe only focus on the people who actually really need it, etc., etc. It's a variation on this. You're giving the organization back time. Time is output, and potentially for the organization, organizational outcomes. So this is really a rather good thing for you to think about. Faster, frictionless security processes. Security that doesn't work for people doesn't work. Full stop. And therefore, the reality is not only are people important as part of the system, but we as security professionals, our job should be trying to make it as frictionless and as easy as possible in every way. And so therefore, anything we can do to make it frictionless ultimately benefits the organization. Most people don't come to work to do security stuff. They come to work to do their work stuff. And in most cases are relatively good at it. So if we can make it easier for them, that's a good thing. But how do you measure this? Well, one of those things leads us to some of the others, maybe complaints that people might make, inputs and provision that people might make. But you might also look at time it takes. How many clicks does it take for somebody to get from first logging on to being able to access the most important system in their workflow? And indeed, are any of those clicks there because of security? Or indeed, how difficult have we made authentication? Or etc. etc. So these are some examples of some of the things that we have seen, and this one was a really interesting one to see. Organizations didn't see lots of organizations measuring this, but did see a few, so we thought we'd add it and share it.
If you're on the road to zero trust, that's definitely something you're measuring.
Yeah, I can imagine so actually, because if you think about it, one of the huge benefits of zero trust is that clearly the potential confidence and freedom that it brings. One of the potential downsides are some of the frictions that it might bring as well. So there's both sides. I touched on this one already. Lower training and compliance costs. Lower training and compliance costs. The cost is not just financial. This is the key point to take away from here. Where we see this being done well, and we are seeing it being done quite a lot, organizations are saying we've reduced the cost of our training, the cost being literally how much we spend, the cost being how much time we take the organization. The biggest cost of the organization is time. The key thing for us folk, we shouldn't be challenged or threatened by this. We just want to get more and more effective. And we have to train people, we have to educate people, as well as other things. But ultimately, we've got to make sure that we're using the business's time well. And number 11, manual security interventions. Whether that's in your team, so where we have seen this applied in organizations, they have started to measure those in the security awareness or the human risk team and how many manual interventions they're having to make, and they're looking to automate. And there's a big drive in so many organizations that we see to automate as many tasks as possible, which is the other reason why I think this is becoming increasingly relevant. But of course, also across the security function, outside in the security ops team and elsewhere, are there more or less manual security interventions required? What's a manual security intervention? Picking up the phone to speak to somebody, reaching out to somebody's line manager, sending an email to somebody because they have done something that they shouldn't have done. Those types of things ultimately cost time and money somewhere. And if you can decrease the amount of those that have to happen, then ultimately you are, of course, achieving an outcome that could be beneficial. This is 11 of 31 people. Please, please, please don't think it's all. Have a look at them all, and you'll look at the 31 and you'll say, gosh, I can think of at least 3 or 4 more that could be added to that list. Add it to the list.
Send
And
those to us and we'll add them to the list.
there we go. There we go.
Let's look at some of the questions and comments. So first I want to draw your attention. You can leave some of the slides up if you want. This is a good one if you want to leave that up while we're chatting. Um, Julie Haney from NIST has dropped in a really interesting resource that I have to confess I've never seen before. So it is the 6-item security attitude scale from Carnegie Mellon. And so the link is in the chat. Julie dropped it in there. 6 really succinct questions. I love the fact that it's so short, but what you can glean from that, if you're trying to get, especially to attitudes and culture, you don't have to ask a million different questions. You have to ask, like I was just saying earlier, the right questions, and then you can decipher sometimes from um, people's answers on different questions. You can glean other things if you look across the data. So I think with these 6 things, it would actually really give you some really interesting results. So Julie, thanks for sharing that. That's fantastic.
And I
The
think
other
I love the fact
thing,
that I love the fact that was Julie from NIST, because
yeah,
one of the things that I was going to point out, hence pausing on this slide, was that some of these outcomes that people are talking about are also emerging as they start to consider the role that the human aspect of cybersecurity plays across the life cycle of
yeah,
security. Across the life cycle. So this slide here is basically taken from a recent piece that we've basically just collated what people are doing across the life cycle and how they're thinking. And of course, what happens to be referring to the NIST TSF, but we could be equally talking about ISO 27001 here as well. So if anybody would like more to this, I can get that to them. But Julie, obviously, and the NIST team do some incredible work helping us be more human-centered
uh,
with.
somebody's looking for that again, so I'm going to drop it in the chat again. So there it is. Um, okay. The other thing we dropped in the chat that Cliff put in there is the SebDB, um, the SciSafe database that Oz mentioned a little bit ago. So I can highly recommend that you take a look at that.
Yeah. Version
Let's
4
see.
on its way out in 5 weeks. So big update in version 4.
And
And
these are
please,
in the webinar chat, by the way, not the Q&A. Okay, so we got a couple of interesting questions here. Oz, you commented earlier on the importance of uh, anonymous security awareness assessment scores. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Why wouldn't it be helpful to know who said what?
yeah, it's not that it wouldn't be helpful. In fact, of course, inevitably, most things that are anonymous, it would also be helpful to know who they are. And I also want to be clear that this is not necessarily something that is applicable to every single thing that you might do with a survey. Actually, some things with surveys, absolutely no issues, whether you're doing them anonymous or otherwise. And so I wouldn't say this is a blanket thing to apply to surveys you might be doing in security awareness. What I was really trying to point out was that in the case of measuring security culture, which is where we're having the conversation, and you are interested in measuring and understanding the values and the attitudes and the perceptions of your people, there might be some questions that you ask in an organizational setting that might be skewed. The response might be skewed if the person who provides the information thinks there might be some form of comeback. Now, you will know what that is, or you have a view on that based on the question that you're asking. Some questions, no issues. Some questions, no issues. But some questions, unfortunately, there might be if it's not anonymous. And so you need to take that in view. And that's why I'm really strongly advocating for getting yourself access to researchers. Researchers understand how best to put questions together to get answers, not necessarily in an infallible way, but in a way that significantly reduces the chance that you get data back that can't be used to answer the question. And this is really important. We sometimes miss this in security. We just all think we're really good at putting together surveys and we'll throw them out there, and then we get data back that ultimately we're drawing the wrong assumptions from because we didn't put it together in the right way in the first place. For what it's worth, you can pretty much ask anybody anything, especially when it comes to behaviors. And if you ask the question well, you will get good answers that can be used as behavior scores, especially if you use the right type of scale, right type of way of them providing answers, and you give them an out. So, for example, at SciSafe, when we ask people, have you done or certain behavior, or do you exhibit certain behavior? We don't just say yes or no, I do, because most people ultimately that maybe they haven't, but they intend to later on, and they don't want to say no. So remind me later. Actually, we use that to provide them a nudge later to remind them. But more importantly, we can see that actually they haven't necessarily done it yet, but they didn't want to say that they haven't done it because they intend to do it. And of course, that significantly reduces the chance that you get the wrong type of binary answer. So good examples, but again, don't be blanket. Find a researcher. Find Julie. Julie knows lots of researchers.
Another question about surveys. So Don asked, how do you do surveys about culture, values, beliefs, all those things, if in being able to reach out to the whole organization? Isn't the survey only as good as how many people participate in it? How do you ensure participation? So while you were chatting, I had a suggested answer here. Could you add just a few questions? I look at this six question survey that Julie shared from Carnegie Mellon. Could you is there a way in your mandatory compliance training to add just a couple of questions so that you can get some insight from across the whole organization? Like that would be the path that I would go if I really wanted 100% participation because it's compliance, they got to do it. Any other thoughts there, Oz? How do you
Yeah,
make
well,
sure
this
you're
is
not just getting the people that are more security conscious to answer the survey?
Ask the server. Yeah. So the thing I was just about to say that there's a caveat to what I'm about to say, but you just gave the caveat there. So actually one of the things. Remember what I said at the beginning? I didn't use the word dogma, but actually our space is plagued by dogma. These incontrovertible beliefs that are people struggle to challenge and hold really deep and indeed ingrained beliefs that actually aren't really true. So one of those beliefs that I see in security all the time is that you need to get near 100% completion, engagement and response for a survey to be valid. Absolutely not true. In fact, it's the opposite. A survey can be valid with as little as sometimes 12 to 15% of people responding, depending on what kind of survey and what you're trying to understand and what kind of things. What's much more important is that the group that is responding is reflective of the organization. So if that 15% is everybody from your security team, people who are inclined to behave a certain way in a certain place, then unfortunately that's not necessarily going to be useful for you. Whereas if that 15% is spread across the organization and you cover every single different type of group, or indeed as many of the different types of groups as you can, you get the picture. And so this is really important because we sometimes have these blanket things. So I don't believe that there's a how do you get X% or what should we be aiming for? I would be suggesting that one, again, back to the speaking to researchers or doing a little bit of research online, or please reach out to us. I'll point you at the places where you can see what some of these benchmarks look like, and then much more effectively work out, make sure that you're getting
So
the spread.
I'll give you an example of the Behave report that we do together. We only survey 1,000 people in each different country, but for the demographics, we follow the census data. So if 20% of the population is over the age of 65, then 20% of the people that we're going to survey or the data we're going to collect
Right.
is going to be from people in that same demographic. So it's that same practice then of making sure it's representative. Another question. I know we've gone over a time a little bit, but we're going to keep going. If you need
I
to
blame
drop off, you
Cliff. I
won't
blame
hurt our
Cliff. He hasn't
feelings.
stopped talking. He literally hasn't stopped talking this whole way through. So we haven't been able to get a word in edgeways.
How do you show that improvement in real life phishing is attributable to user education versus the technology? So this was always something that I struggled with because I felt like I had to have apples to apples. This is a question a lot of us have. If yes, I can tell you that my report rate is up or my click rate is down or whatever, but really it was about making sure people did the right thing with the real thing. And to know that, you have to have data on how many actual fish got through to inboxes and were there for more than a split second before they were pulled out by the email security team. Um, and then you needed to know like how many people reported that real fish and how many people who got it didn't. And that at the time, this was quite a while ago, but that was just a very manual thing. And no matter how much I schmoozed the email security team, that was something they didn't have time to help me with. Um, but this has been a number of years. So are there any better solutions to that, Oz? How do you measure what people are doing with a real thing? Does
Yeah.
it
So I,
depend
I
on the
think
email
that
security tool you're using?
I think that there are lots of ways and lots of organizations who are now combining simulated fish data with real world fish data by integrating. So I know many of our customers, for example, they are Mimecast or they are Proofpoint customers. And so they integrate that data into the SciSafe platform so they can compare the two. But the reality is that I I want to be a bit careful here because I could go off and want to start twitching quite a lot, talking about phishing. I think we obsess over phishing in a way that means that many other things that are just as important get clouded over. So it's a really valid question. I don't have a brilliant answer for you right now but I'm happy to go away and certainly give you some information based on what we're seeing elsewhere. But I would just encourage us to be like so powerfully aware that there are more security behaviors than just reporting and clicking on phishing emails. And even if phishing is your concern, because phishing is not a behavior, phishing is a vector and a challenge, but it's not actually a behavior. If phishing is the vector that you're concerned about, there's actually about 12 different behaviors that you could focus on in order to reduce the risk that phishing presents to your organization. And many people unfortunately don't know that they focus on two: report rate, click rate.
Hey, I don't think we have any other questions. We have a comment here that somebody said their email security team is outsourced inbox scanning and they can't provide metrics. I would figure out who they outsourced it to, see if you can work with them. Um, Cliff has just added a Convene discount code for Convene in Cleveland this August. I know I live in Texas. I'm looking forward to getting out of the heat. Um, and I needed another excuse to go see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame again. So I think long gone are the days when we called Cleveland the mistake on the lake. There's a lot going on there. It's really pretty on Lake Erie in the summer, and we're really excited about the speakers that we've lined up. Um, there's one more comment in there if you guys want to read. Somebody has another comment, but no other question. Well, wait, one more question. Let's see. Um, no, somebody just wanted to, let's see. Thanks for asking my question. Our leadership is very oriented toward how do you know what you're doing is working? Like people
That
in
is
the
the
space get
question.
that question all the time, which we all know is a challenge for educators and awareness teams. Can you think of any quick win metrics to prove your efforts are having direct results? Um, I I I like the demand for services, right? I mean, if you have a model where you've got different teams working with the business, maybe you've got application security, or maybe if you have a BSO model, like a business security officer model, you can kind of try to gauge through their engagement with the business, like how much you want them coming to you, right? Like this process where we're constantly chasing after the business and saying, hey, wait, maybe you need us to look at that before you go do something. That's what turns us into the department of no, because we're coming in at the last minute, and chances are there is going to be a no that comes out of our mouths. So I think getting involved upstream, and the best way for us to measure that at the company I was at was demand for services. But Oz, what else? What else is
Well,
a
so
quick
I'm
win
I'm
metric?
a bit more of a purist on this one. I'm a bit more of a purist on this one. I think the first thing is to define what working means. What working means. In most cases, in most organizations, working means risk reduction. And as I said up front, if you're not changing behavior, you're not reducing risk. Full stop. Doesn't matter what else you're doing, doesn't matter what else is happening. If behavior isn't improving, you're not reducing risk. Now, those behaviors are varied. Security behavior database is a good example of where you could go to, and Lisa just gave another. How many people are coming in? That's a behavior, not necessarily a security behavior per se, but it is a behavior that you might want to be influencing. So if that is what means working, then you can start to measure those things. If it's other types of behaviors, things that people might do to reduce risk to the organization very directly, reducing the chance of an incident or attack being successful, then you should be measuring them, and so many of them can be measured. But this question is one that is literally at the heart of why we exist, because so many security teams are being asked this. And interestingly, even though the frameworks don't yet tell people to do it, we have started to see regulators put into, particularly in financial services, interestingly, put into the regulatory guidance or the regulatory findings that you should train your people, make sure it's risk-based, make sure it's role-based. In some cases, make sure you're measuring culture, or make sure you're impacting security culture. But the thing that I've seen added in the last 13, 14 months that I've never seen before is, and provide validation that the controls are positively influencing security behaviors, i.e. that they're working.
One
Behaviors
more
change.
question. Where do we go to find the 12 indicators about phishing, the 12 phishing behaviors?
I think that's from Phil. Phil, the security behavior database will be on there. If you go to the
Okay.
database, you will see. I would suggest have a look at it now, but also have wait to see it in 4 weeks' time, maybe 5 weeks' time now. 4 weeks' time, the latest update, which is extremely exciting. You'll be able to filter by malware infection. So if ransomware is a concern, malware infection, which are the behaviors associated with malware infection? If data leakage is your concern, and of course you can filter for whatever the challenges or concern you have. But please reach out to me as well. I will flash back up on here how you can reach me, and I will provide you whatever information is at all helpful for any of you who would like it.
That I think we're done. I'm gonna let you bring up that information
Yep, just
so
the,
people
the
have
link on the
that.
right, link on the right, or the link on the left. If you want to hear this type of stuff every 2 weeks straight into your inbox, we can send it to you, as many people who get the newsletter get it.
Okay. Thank you, Oz. This was a lot to cram in. This is very content rich. I like this.
No worries at all. And it's brilliant to do it. Sorry it was so fast. It was a canter, but actually, of course, like we said, we're just trying to get the juices flowing and get conversations going rather than give all the answers. I don't believe any of us have all the answers, but much more importantly, it's always great to spend time with the Convene community. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks, Oz. Thanks, Cliff. Take care, everyone.